As the floodwaters surged around her legs, Maggie knew she had only seconds to save the pregnant mare before they both disappeared beneath the raging current. What emerged from Luna's womb hours later, a snow-white filly with golden rings around her eyes, would forever alter the boundary between the natural world and something far beyond human understanding. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The rain had been falling for days, relentless and merciless. What began as a gentle spring shower had transformed into a devastating deluge that threatened everything in its path. The small rural community of Willowbrook was no stranger to seasonal storms, but this was something else entirely. Rivers swelled beyond their banks, roads disappeared beneath murky waters, and families abandoned their homes, fleeing to higher ground with whatever possessions they could salvage. On the outskirts of town, Maggie Reynolds stood at her kitchen window, watching with growing dread as the floodwaters crept closer to her modest farmhouse. At 42, Maggie had weathered many storms, both literal and metaphorical. After losing her husband to cancer 3 years prior, she had maintained the small horse farm they'd built together through sheer determination and an unwavering work ethic. Her weathered hands and the lines etched around her eyes told the story of her struggles, but there was still a fire in her gaze that refused to be extinguished. "It's not stopping, is it?" said a voice behind her. Maggie turned to see her 19-year-old daughter Emma standing in the doorway. Emma's dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes, so much like her father's, reflected the same worry that Maggie felt. "No, sweetheart, it's not," Maggie replied, glancing back at the rising water. "I think we need to start moving the horses to higher ground." "The water's already reached the lower pasture." Emma nodded, already pulling on her rain boots. "I'll call Jackson, we'll need help." Jackson Chen had been working for the Reynolds family since he was 16, starting as a stable hand and eventually becoming an indispensable part of their small operation. Now 24, he was the closest thing to a son that Maggie had, and she trusted him implicitly with the care of their animals. Within 30 minutes, Jackson arrived in his old but reliable pickup truck, the tires splashing through puddles that were quickly becoming small ponds. His normally cheerful face was set in a grim expression as he surveyed the farm. "We need to hurry," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "The bridge on County Road 8 is already underwater. They're saying we have maybe 3 hours before this whole area is flooded." Together, they worked with practiced efficiency, leading horses from their stalls into the trailer. The animals sensed the urgency and the danger, their eyes wide with fear, nostrils flaring as they caught the scent of the rising water. One by one, they loaded 5 of their 6 horses, preparing to transport them to the higher elevation of Jackson's family property on the other side of town. "Where's Luna?" Emma asked suddenly, looking around for the pregnant Andalusian mare that was the pride of their small breeding program. Maggie's heart sank. Luna had been moved to the far pasture days ago, where the grass was lusher and the terrain more suitable for a heavily pregnant mare. It was also the lowest point of their property, the first area to be affected by the rising floodwaters. "She's in the south pasture," Maggie said, already moving toward the barn to grab a halter. "I'll go get her." "No," Jackson said firmly, placing a hand on her arm. "The water's too high already. I'll take the ATV." Before either woman could protest, Jackson was mounting the all-terrain vehicle and speeding off toward the south pasture. The rain pelted his face like tiny needles, and he squinted through the downpour, trying to spot Luna's dark form against the increasingly waterlogged landscape. When he finally reached the pasture gate, his heart dropped. What had once been a grassy meadow was now a shallow lake, the water already knee-deep in some places. And there, in the middle of it all, stood Luna, her swollen belly a testament to the precious life she carried. The mare was trapped on what had become a small island, a slightly elevated patch of ground that was shrinking by the minute as the waters continued to rise. Jackson dismounted the ATV and waded into the cold water, calling out to Luna. The mare's ears perked up at the sound of his voice, but she didn't move. Whether from fear or an instinctive understanding that her island was the safest place, she remained rooted to the spot. "Come on, girl," Jackson coaxed, moving slowly toward her, the water now reaching his thighs. "We need to get you out of here." Luna nickered softly but still didn't budge. As Jackson got closer, he could see why. The mare was trembling, not just from fear, but from early signs of labor. His stomach clenched with dread. Of all times for Luna to go into labor, this was perhaps the worst possible scenario. Back at the farmhouse, Maggie paced anxiously, checking her watch every few minutes. "He should have been back by now," she muttered, peering out the window into the storm. Emma stood beside her, her young face etched with worry. "Maybe we should go after him." Before Maggie could respond, her phone rang. It was Jackson, his voice barely audible over the howling wind and pounding rain. "I found Luna, but she's surrounded by water and showing signs of labor. I can't get her to move. I need help, and the ATV won't be enough. We need something bigger." "We'll bring the truck," Maggie decided immediately. "Hold on, we're coming." As Maggie and Emma navigated the increasingly treacherous roads in Maggie's old pickup truck, the reality of their situation became alarmingly clear. The floodwaters were rising faster than anyone had anticipated, and roads that had been passable just an hour ago were now dangerous torrents. By the time they reached the south pasture, the water had risen even higher. Jackson was still with Luna, standing in water that now reached his waist, one hand on the mare's neck, speaking to her in low, soothing tones. "She won't move," he called out, as Maggie and Emma waded toward them. "And the contractions are getting stronger." Maggie assessed the situation quickly. They couldn't deliver a foal here, not in these conditions. But moving a mare in labor was risky under the best circumstances, let alone through floodwaters in a raging storm. "We don't have a choice," she said firmly. "If we leave her here, both she and the foal will drown." Working together, they managed to slip a halter over Luna's head. The mare was reluctant, rolling her eyes in fear, but years of trust in these humans won out over her instinct to stay put. With gentle but insistent pressure, they began to guide her through the water toward higher ground. The going was painfully slow. Luna balked at each step, and twice they nearly lost her when she slipped on the submerged, muddy ground. The water continued to rise, and soon it reached Luna's belly, making each movement a struggle against the current. Just as they reached the edge of what had once been the pasture, Luna let out a pained whinny and stopped dead. Her legs splayed as another contraction hit her. In the beam of the truck's headlights, her dark form stood out starkly against the brown floodwaters, her eyes wide with pain and fear. "She can't go on," Emma cried, her voice breaking. "Mom, we're going to lose her." But Maggie Reynolds hadn't survived everything life had thrown at her by giving up easily. "No," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging around them. "We are not losing her. Not today." With renewed determination, they urged Luna forward, one agonizing step at a time. The mare seemed to draw strength from their resolve, pushing through her pain and fear, trusting these humans who had never failed her before. As the truck's headlights cut through the rain and darkness, illuminating Luna's struggling form in the floodwaters, none of them could have imagined what awaited them, or the miracle that Luna would bring into the world once they reached safety. The world had narrowed to this single desperate moment. Time seemed to slow as Maggie, Emma, and Jackson fought against both nature and Luna's own instincts. The rain hammered down relentlessly, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The only constant was the reassuring beam of the truck's headlights, cutting through the darkness like a lifeline. "Keep her head up," Maggie shouted over the roar of the storm. "Don't let her panic." Jackson gripped Luna's halter firmly, guiding her forward while trying to keep her from thrashing in the deepening water. Each step was a battle, against the current, against the mare's fear, against the contractions that were now coming with frightening regularity. "The truck," Emma cried suddenly, pointing ahead. "The waters reached the truck." Sure enough, the floodwaters had risen so quickly that they were now lapping at the bottom of Maggie's pickup, threatening to flood the engine. If the truck stalled, they would lose their only means of getting Luna to safety. "I'll move it higher," Emma said, already splashing toward the vehicle. "You two keep bringing her." As Emma clambered into the driver's seat, water sloshing around her boots, Maggie and Jackson continued their slow progress with Luna. The mare's breathing was labored now, her sides heaving with exertion and the strain of imminent birth. "We're not going to make it," Jackson said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "She's going to deliver right here." Maggie shook her head, water streaming down her face. "No choice. We keep moving." The determination in her voice seemed to reach Luna. The mare's eyes, wide with fear, fixed on Maggie's face. There was something in that gaze, a trust, a desperate faith, that cut straight to Maggie's heart. This wasn't just about saving a valuable animal. This was about honoring a bond forged through years of care and companionship. With a renewed surge of strength, Luna pushed forward, allowing them to guide her through the deepest part of the flood. The water now reached her chest, and each movement was a struggle against the powerful current. But she kept going, one painstaking step after another. Emma had managed to move the truck to slightly higher ground, though the water still swirled around its tires. She flashed the headlights, creating a beacon for them to follow through the darkness and rain. "Almost there," Jackson encouraged, his voice hoarse from shouting over the storm. "Just a little further, girl." Luna let out a pained whinny as another contraction gripped her. She stopped, legs splayed for balance, her whole body trembling with the effort of remaining upright in the rushing water. "She can't take much more of this," Maggie said, stroking the mare's neck. "Come on, Luna. You can do this." Whether it was Maggie's voice or simply the mare's own indomitable spirit, Luna found the strength to continue. Step by painful step, they made their way toward the truck and the promise of higher ground beyond. As they finally reached the vehicle, Emma jumped out, heedless of the water that immediately soaked her to the knees. "The road to the main house is completely flooded," she reported, "but I think we can make it to the old barn on the north ridge. It's the highest point on the property." The old barn had been built by Maggie's father-in-law decades ago, on a ridge that had never flooded in living memory. It was dilapidated and rarely used anymore, but right now it represented their only hope. "Let's go," Maggie decided. "Luna can ride in the trailer." Getting a horse into a trailer under normal circumstances was challenging enough. Getting a frightened, pregnant mare in active labor into a trailer during a flood seemed nearly impossible. But they had no choice. Jackson waded to the back of the trailer and lowered the ramp as far as it would go, though it still created a steep incline from the water. Emma positioned herself at Luna's head, speaking softly and steadily to the mare, while Maggie and Jackson stood on either side, ready to guide her up. "Now," Maggie said, and all three moved in unison, urging Luna forward. The mare balked at first, eyeing the metal ramp with suspicion. Another contraction hit, and she threw her head back, a sound of distress escaping her throat. "Please, Luna," Emma pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please try." In that moment, Luna looked directly at Emma, and something passed between them, some understanding that transcended the barrier between human and animal. With what seemed like a conscious decision, Luna gathered herself and with one powerful surge lunged up the ramp into the trailer. Jackson quickly secured the back while Maggie rushed to the driver's seat. The engine roared to life and the truck began to move, water spraying from the tires as they navigated the flooded terrain toward the north ridge. Inside the trailer, Emma stayed with Luna, holding onto a support bar with one hand and stroking the mare's neck with the other as the vehicle swayed and bumped over the uneven ground. Luna's breathing was becoming more labored, and Emma could feel the powerful contractions rippling through the mare's body. "Hang on," she whispered, "just a little longer." The journey to the old barn seemed to take an eternity. Twice Maggie had to detour when she found the road completely submerged. The truck's engine strained as it pushed through water that sometimes reached halfway up the doors. But Maggie drove with a singular focus, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her eyes never leaving the treacherous path ahead. When they finally reached the ridge, the relief was palpable. The old barn stood silhouetted against the stormy sky, weathered but sturdy on its elevated foundation. The floodwaters hadn't reached this high, though the ground was muddy and slick with rain. Jackson jumped out first, sliding the barn door open with a screech of rusted metal. Inside it was musty and cobweb-filled, but dry, gloriously, blessedly dry. Backing the trailer as close to the entrance as possible, they lowered the ramp again. Luna needed no encouragement this time. As soon as the way was clear, she stepped carefully down, her instincts guiding her toward shelter. Emma quickly spread some old hay that had been stored in the barn, creating a soft bed in one corner. Luna made her way to it, and with a groan that seemed to come from the depths of her being, lowered herself to the ground. "She's delivering now," Maggie said, kneeling beside the mare. "Emma, get the emergency kit from the truck. Jackson, find some clean water if you can, and any buckets or containers in here that look usable." As Emma and Jackson rushed to comply, Maggie stayed with Luna, her hand steady on the mare's heaving flank. "It's okay, girl," she murmured. "You're safe now. You can bring your baby into the world." Luna's eyes were half closed, her entire focus turned inward to the monumental task at hand. Her powerful body, which had fought so valiantly against the flood, now channeled all its strength into bringing new life forth. Outside, the storm continued to rage, water rising ever higher across the valley. But here, in this ancient barn on the ridge, a small pocket of warmth and hope had been created. As Maggie prepared to help Luna deliver her foal, she couldn't help but think that they had already witnessed one miracle tonight, their escape from the flood. Perhaps they were about to witness another. What none of them could have anticipated, however, was just how extraordinary that miracle would be. The old barn creaked and groaned under the assault of the storm, but its sturdy timber frame held firm. Decades of weathering countless storms had made it resilient, much like the woman who now knelt beside the laboring mare. Maggie worked with quiet efficiency, her movements calm despite the chaos of the situation. Her steady hands had delivered many foals over the years, but never under such dire circumstances. Emma returned with the emergency kit, her clothes soaked and her face pale with worry. "Will she be okay, Mom?" she asked, setting the kit down and kneeling beside her mother. "Luna's strong," Maggie replied, not taking her eyes off the mare. "And she's done this before, but it's early. The foal wasn't due for another week." Jackson appeared with 2 rusty buckets of rainwater he'd collected from a leak in the roof. "It's not clean enough to drink, but we can use it to wash up," he said, placing them nearby. Luna's breathing was rapid now, her sides heaving with each powerful contraction. Her dark eyes, usually so expressive, were glazed with pain and effort. Maggie checked the mare's progress, her experienced hands gentle but purposeful. "The foal is coming," she announced. "I can see the amniotic sac." Emma moved to Luna's head, stroking her neck and murmuring words of encouragement. Jackson positioned himself beside Maggie, ready to assist. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault, rain drumming against the roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. "That's it, Luna," Maggie encouraged as the mare strained. Push, girl." Luna let out a low, guttural sound that seemed to rise from the depths of her being, her powerful body tense, channeling all its strength into bringing forth new life. The amniotic sac appeared, glistening in the dim light of the battery-powered lantern they'd brought from the truck. "There's the first hoof," Maggie said, tension evident in her voice despite her outward calm. "And the second? Good. The foal's properly positioned." A proper birth position was crucial. A foal needed to come front feet first, followed by the nose like a diver entering water. Any deviation could spell disaster for both mare and foal. Luna pushed again, and more of the foal became visible. Delicate hooves, slender legs, and then the small head, still encased in the translucent sac. "The sac isn't breaking," Jackson observed, concern edging his voice. Without hesitation, Maggie reached for a clean towel from the emergency kit and gently tore the membrane away from the foal's nose. "There," she said. "Now it can breathe when it's fully out." Luna seemed to gather her strength for one final monumental effort. With a sound that was half groan, half scream, she pushed, and the foal slid into the waiting hands of Maggie and Jackson. "It's a filly," Emma exclaimed, her face lighting up with joy despite the tension of the moment. Maggie quickly cleared the newborn's airways and began rubbing her vigorously with a towel to stimulate circulation and dry her off. The filly was small but perfectly formed, her wet coat dark against the straw. But Luna wasn't relaxing as she should after delivery. Instead, she remained tense, her breathing labored, her eyes wide with continued effort. "Something's wrong," Maggie said, handing the filly to Jackson so he could continue drying her. She returned her attention to Luna, checking her condition. "There's another one," she said, disbelief coloring her voice. "Luna's carrying twins." Emma gasped. Twin foals were incredibly rare in horses, occurring in less than 1% of births. And when they did occur, the prognosis was often poor for one or both foals, who typically were underweight and underdeveloped. "But her ultrasound only showed one foal," Emma said, confusion mixing with concern. "The second one must have been hidden behind the first," Maggie replied, already refocusing on helping Luna with this unexpected development. "It happens sometimes. Come on, Luna, you can do this." Luna seemed to understand the urgency. With renewed determination, she pushed again, and soon the second amniotic sac appeared. This delivery progressed faster than the first, perhaps because the birth canal was already dilated. Within minutes, a second foal was sliding into the world. "Another filly," Maggie announced, quickly clearing the second foal's airways as she had done for the first. But as she began to clean the second foal, Maggie's movements suddenly slowed. She stared at the newborn with an expression of complete astonishment. "Mom?" Emma asked, concerned by her mother's reaction. "What is it? Is something wrong with her?" Maggie shook her head slowly, still staring at the foal. "No, not wrong. Just impossible." Jackson, who had been attending to the first filly, moved closer to see what had caused Maggie's reaction. When his eyes fell on the second foal, he too froze in surprise. "I've never seen anything like it," he whispered. Emma shifted her position to get a better look, and when she did, she understood their amazement. Unlike her sister, whose coat was a deep bay like Luna's, the second filly's coat was pure, pristine white, not the grayish white that would later darken, but a true snow-white coat. More remarkable still were the unusual markings around her eyes, perfect rings of golden hair that gave the impression of luminous eyes peering out from the white face. "A white Andalusian?" Emma breathed, reaching out tentatively to touch the filly's damp coat. "But that's almost unheard of. And those markings?" Maggie nodded, still stunned. "In all my years, I've never seen a foal like this. White Andalusians are incredibly rare, and these markings, I've never seen anything like them." "Luna," exhausted but alert, turned her head to inspect her newborns. She nuzzled each one in turn, accepting both despite their striking differences. The first filly, already dry enough to reveal her deep bay coat, struggled to her feet on wobbly legs, instinctively searching for her mother's milk. The white filly, though seemingly more delicate, was not far behind, showing a determination that belied her fragile appearance. "They're both trying to stand already," Jackson said, his voice filled with wonder. "That's a good sign, isn't it?" Maggie nodded, professional concern temporarily overriding her amazement. "Yes, but they're small, especially the white one. Twin foals often struggle. We'll need to monitor them closely." As they watched, the white filly managed to stand, her slender legs trembling with the effort. Despite her small size, there was something undeniably special about her, a presence that seemed to illuminate the dim interior of the old barn. "What will you name them?" Jackson asked, his eyes never leaving the remarkable scene before them. Maggie looked at the bay filly, already nursing vigorously at Luna's side. "The bay one, she's a survivor, a fighter. I think I'll call her Storm." Her eyes moved to the white filly, who had now also found her way to Luna's milk. "And this one, there's something almost otherworldly about her, isn't there, those eyes?" "Aurora," Emma suggested softly. "It means dawn, like she's bringing light after the storm." Maggie smiled, feeling a peculiar certainty that this unusual foal would indeed bring something special into their lives. Aurora it is. Outside, the rain had begun to ease, though the floodwaters still surrounded their refuge on the ridge. As dawn approached, casting a pale glow through the cracks in the barn walls, none of them could have predicted how the birth of these twin fillies, particularly the extraordinary Aurora, would change their lives forever. The night passed slowly in the old barn, each hour marked by the gradual weakening of the storm outside. Maggie, Emma, and Jackson took turns keeping watch over Luna and her newborn twins, catching brief moments of rest on makeshift beds of straw. Despite their exhaustion, there was a palpable sense of wonder in the air, a feeling that they had witnessed something extraordinary. By morning, the rain had stopped entirely, though the world outside remained transformed by the flood. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the barn's weathered boards, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the golden beams. In this natural spotlight, Aurora seemed to glow, her white coat catching and reflecting the light in a way that made her appear almost luminous. "Have you ever seen anything like her?" Emma asked softly, sitting cross-legged beside the foals as they nursed. Storm was already showing her hardy nature, pushing against her mother with surprising strength as she fed. Aurora, by contrast, seemed almost delicate, though her determination to survive was evident in the way she held her ground beside her larger sister. Maggie shook her head, observing the white filly with a mixture of professional interest and something akin to awe. "No, never. A true white Andalusian is rare enough, but those markings—" She gestured to the golden rings around Aurora's eyes, which seemed to shimmer in the morning light. "I've never seen or heard of anything like them. They're almost like she's wearing a mask of light." Jackson, who had been at the barn door assessing the flood situation, returned to their side. "It's still too deep to get the truck through," he reported, "but it's definitely receding. By this afternoon, we might be able to make it back to the house." Maggie nodded, her practical nature reasserting itself. "We'll need to get both foals checked by a vet as soon as possible. Twins often have health complications, and with Aurora being so unusual." Her voice trailed off as she watched Emma gently stroke Aurora's neck. The filly, who had been somewhat standoffish with Maggie and Jackson, leaned into Emma's touch, her eyes half closing in apparent contentment. "She likes you," Maggie observed, a small smile softening her worried expression. Emma didn't respond immediately, her attention fully captured by the white filly. There was something in Aurora's gaze that seemed to reach beyond normal animal awareness, an intelligence, a presence that Emma couldn't quite define but could definitely feel. "I think," Emma began hesitantly, "I think she understands us. Not just like normal horses do, but more." Under different circumstances, Maggie might have dismissed such a notion as the romantic imagination of her young daughter. But after everything they had witnessed, Luna's dramatic rescue, the miraculous twin birth, Aurora's impossible coloring, she found herself more open to extraordinary possibilities. "What makes you say that?" she asked, moving closer to observe the interaction between Emma and the filly. Emma considered for a moment, her hand still resting on Aurora's neck. "It's her eyes. When she looks at me, it's like she's really seeing me. And earlier, when you were talking about getting a vet to check them, she turned to look at you right when you said it. Not just randomly, exactly when you mentioned it." Jackson, who had been listening silently, nodded slowly. "I noticed something too. When I was checking the flood levels, I was thinking out loud about which route would be safest to take back. Aurora's ears were following me the whole time, moving whenever I mentioned a different path. Like she was, I don't know, following the conversation." Maggie might have attributed such behavior to normal equine curiosity, but something about Aurora did seem different. The way she held herself, the alertness in her unusual eyes, the deliberate quality of her movements, all suggested a level of awareness that went beyond typical foal behavior. "Well," Maggie said finally, "whatever else she may be, she's definitely special, and she's going to need special care." She checked her watch and sighed. "We should try to reach Dr. Hannigan on the phone. The cell service might be back up by now." While Maggie stepped outside to attempt a call, Emma remained with the foals, watching as they rested beside Luna. Storm had fallen asleep after nursing, her small body rising and falling with deep, contented breaths. Aurora, however, remained awake, her golden-ringed eyes taking in her surroundings with evident curiosity. "You're something else, aren't you?" Emma whispered, not expecting a response. To her astonishment, Aurora turned her head and looked directly at Emma, holding her gaze with an intensity that sent a shiver down the girl's spine. Then, in a motion that seemed far too deliberate for a newborn foal, Aurora inclined her head slightly, as if in acknowledgement. Emma gasped softly. "Did you just—" She glanced around, but Jackson was busy organizing their supplies, and Maggie was still outside. No one else had witnessed the exchange. Before Emma could process what had happened, Maggie returned, her expression brightening slightly. "I got through to Dr. Hannigan. She can't get here until the road's clear, but she's given me some instructions for caring for the twins in the meantime. She's quite interested in hearing about Aurora." By early afternoon, as Jackson had predicted, the floodwaters had receded enough to make the journey back to the house possible, though it would still be treacherous. They decided that Jackson would go first with the truck, assessing the route and returning if it was safe enough to transport Luna and the foals. As they waited for his return, Maggie took the opportunity to examine both fillies more thoroughly. Storm was developing exactly as expected. Her reflexes were strong, her temperature normal, and her appetite robust. Aurora, though smaller, also appeared healthy, but there was no denying her oddities extended beyond her appearance. "She's not behaving like a normal foal," Maggie murmured, more to herself than to Emma as she checked Aurora's heartbeat. "She's too aware." Emma, who had been watching intently, nodded. "I told you, she understands." As if to confirm Emma's words, Aurora turned at that moment and fixed Maggie with that same penetrating gaze Emma had experienced earlier. For a brief, disconcerting moment, Maggie had the distinct impression that the foal was not only understanding their conversation, but forming judgments about it. The sound of the truck's engine broke the strange spell, Jackson had returned, his face alight with relief. "The route's clear enough," he reported. "We can make it back if we're careful." Preparing Luna and the twins for transport was a delicate operation. Luna, though exhausted from her ordeal, was cooperative, seeming to understand the need to move to safer ground. Storm needed some coaxing, but eventually followed her mother into the trailer. Aurora, surprisingly, required no encouragement at all, walking into the trailer with purpose, as if she had done it 100 times before. "That's not normal," Jackson said, watching the white filly with a mixture of admiration and unease. Foals her age are usually scared of new spaces, especially something like a trailer. Emma smiled, a hint of pride in her expression. "I told you, she's special." As they carefully navigated the muddy, debris-strewn road back to the Reynolds farm, none of them could have anticipated just how special Aurora would prove to be, or how her presence in their lives would soon attract attention from far beyond their small rural community. The Reynolds farm had not escaped the flood's wrath. As they drove up the muddy driveway, the evidence of destruction was everywhere. Fences down, fields turned to shallow lakes, and debris scattered across the property. The house itself had been spared the worst, situated as it was on a gentle rise, but the lower pastures and outbuildings had not been so fortunate. "It could have been worse," Maggie said quietly, as Jackson parked the truck as close to the main barn as possible. The structure, though weathered, had withstood the storm far better than some of the neighboring properties they'd passed on their way back. Emma's focus, however, was not on the damage but on ensuring the safe transfer of Luna and her foals from the trailer to the barn. As they opened the trailer door, Luna emerged first, looking around warily at the changed landscape. Storm followed closely behind her mother, sticking to Luna's side like a shadow. Aurora, in contrast, stepped down with what could only be described as deliberate grace, her head held high as she surveyed her surroundings. "Look at her," Jackson murmured to Maggie. "Doesn't move like a day-old foal at all." Maggie nodded, unable to deny the peculiarity of Aurora's behavior. In her decades of breeding and raising horses, she had never seen a newborn foal exhibit such poise and awareness. It was as though Aurora had bypassed the awkward, uncertain stage that all foals went through and emerged with an innate understanding of her body and surroundings. Once inside the barn, they settled Luna and the twins in the largest stall, freshly bedded with clean straw. Luna immediately began to inspect the space, her maternal instincts driving her to ensure it was safe for her foals. Storm busied herself with nursing again, her appetite seemingly insatiable. Aurora, however, after a brief nursing session, began a methodical exploration of the stall, examining each corner and feature as if committing them to memory. "Dr. Hannigan should be here soon," Maggie said, checking her phone. "She texted that she's on her way. The main roads are clearing now." Emma, who had been watching Aurora's exploration with fascination, nodded absently. "Mom, do you think Aurora is okay? I mean, she's not acting like a normal foal, but she doesn't seem sick or anything." Maggie approached the stall gate, her expert eyes assessing the white filly. "She's not showing any signs of illness. If anything, she's showing more coordination and awareness than I'd expect. But with her being such an unusual color and those markings, well, we'll see what Dr. Hannigan has to say." Dr. Eleanor Hannigan arrived an hour later, her mud-splattered veterinary truck pulling up beside the barn. A tall woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp, observant eyes, Dr. Hannigan had been the Reynolds veterinarian for over 15 years. She'd seen almost everything in her long career, or so she thought until she stepped into the barn that day. "Maggie," she greeted, setting down her equipment. "Emma, Jackson, I came as soon as the roads were passable. Twins, you said? That's rare enough, but you mentioned something unusual about one of them." Maggie led her to the stall. "See for yourself, Ellie." Dr. Hannigan approached the stall gate, and for a moment she simply stared, her professional composure giving way to open astonishment. "Good Lord," she breathed finally. "I've never, in all my years." Aurora, as if aware she was the subject of discussion, turned to face the veterinarian. The sun, now streaming through the barn windows, caught the golden rings around her eyes, making them appear to glow with an inner light. "A true white Andalusian," Dr. Hannigan said, her voice hushed with wonder. "Not gray, not cremello, but true white. That alone is extraordinary. But those markings..." She turned to Maggie. "May I?" Maggie nodded, and the veterinarian entered the stall. Luna, who normally grew tense around veterinary examinations, remained calm, as if sensing that Dr. Hannigan meant no harm to her unusual offspring. Storm shifted closer to her mother, but Aurora stood her ground, watching the approaching human with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. The examination of Storm was straightforward. The bay filly, though small for a singleton birth, was within normal parameters for a twin. She was healthy, responsive, and developing as expected for a day-old foal. Aurora's examination, however, proved more remarkable. "Her physical development is accelerated," Dr. Hannigan reported, her professional curiosity fully engaged. "Muscle tone, reflexes, coordination, all more advanced than they should be at this stage, and her eyes..." She peered closely at the golden rings. "I've never seen anything like this. It's not albinism, not any coat pattern I'm familiar with." As Dr. Hannigan continued her examination, Aurora maintained an almost eerie stillness, cooperating in a way that seemed impossible for a newborn animal. When the veterinarian finished and stepped back, the white filly turned her head deliberately to look at each person present, ending with Emma, whom she regarded with particular intensity. "There's something else," Emma said hesitantly, looking to her mother for permission to continue. When Maggie nodded, she went on. "She seems to understand us. Really understand, I mean. Like she's following our conversations and responding to them somehow." Dr. Hannigan's eyebrows rose, but instead of dismissing the claim, she observed Aurora thoughtfully. "Extraordinary intelligence in animals is not unheard of, though it's rare to see such signs so early." She turned to Maggie. "I'd like to run some blood tests, with your permission. Nothing invasive, just routine checks plus a few additional panels. I have a colleague at the university who specializes in equine genetics. He might be interested in this case." Maggie agreed, though with a hint of reservation. "As long as it doesn't harm her. I don't want Aurora becoming some kind of laboratory curiosity." "Of course not," Dr. Hannigan assured her. "But you must realize, Maggie, that a foal like this, well, she's going to attract attention no matter what. Better to understand what makes her special under controlled circumstances than to have rumors spreading." As Dr. Hannigan collected her samples and prepared to leave, she paused at the barn door. "One more thing, Maggie. I'd advise keeping this quiet for now, at least until we have some answers. But word will get out eventually. It always does in small communities like ours. And when it does..." She glanced back at the stall where Aurora stood watching them, her white coat gleaming in the afternoon light. "Well, be prepared for interest from beyond Willowbrook." After the veterinarian departed, a contemplative silence fell over the barn. Maggie busied herself with chores, her mind processing the implications of Dr. Hannigan's words. Jackson returned to assessing the flood damage on the property. Emma, however, remained by the stall, her connection to Aurora growing stronger by the hour. "What are you?" she whispered when she was sure no one else could hear. "Where did you come from?" Aurora approached the stall gate, moving with that same deliberate grace that belied her age. She stretched her neck forward until her muzzle nearly touched Emma's outstretched hand. Then, in a moment that Emma would replay in her mind countless times in the days to come, Aurora exhaled softly against her palm, a warm breath that seemed to carry with it a sensation Emma could only describe as recognition. In that breath, in that moment of connection, Emma felt a certainty deep in her core. Aurora had come into their lives for a reason, and nothing would ever be the same again. In the days that followed, life at the Reynolds farm settled into a new rhythm centered around Luna and her remarkable twins. The floodwaters continued to recede, revealing the full extent of the damage to the property. Fences needed mending, debris required clearing, and several outbuildings demanded extensive repairs. Yet despite the workload, Maggie, Emma, and Jackson found themselves drawn again and again to the barn to check on the foals, particularly Aurora. Each visit revealed new surprises. While Storm developed as expected, wobbling around on strengthening legs, nursing vigorously, and napping frequently, Aurora's progress defied all normal expectations. By the end of her first week, she was not only walking with the confidence of a much older foal, but displaying behaviors that left them all speechless. "Mom," Emma called one morning, her voice echoing through the barn. "Come quick." Maggie hurried over, wiping her hands on her jeans as she approached the stall. "What is it? Is something wrong?" Emma pointed to where Aurora stood in the center of the stall. "Watch." As they observed, Aurora approached the water bucket that hung from the stall wall. Instead of drinking directly from it as any normal horse would, the white filly studied it for a moment, then deliberately pressed her muzzle against the release mechanism that controlled the water flow. Water trickled into the bucket, and Aurora drank, then pressed the mechanism again to stop the flow. "She figured out how to operate the automatic waterer," Emma said, her voice hushed with amazement. "I've never shown her how it works. None of us have." Maggie watched, stunned. Horses typically learn such behaviors through observation or accidental discovery, and even then, usually not until they were much older. For a week-old foal to deliberately manipulate the mechanism showed problem-solving abilities far beyond normal equine capacity. That's not possible," Maggie murmured, though the evidence was right before her eyes. Similar incidents occurred with increasing frequency. Aurora learned to unlatch the lower portion of the stall door by the end of her second week. By the third week, she was observed comforting Storm during a thunderstorm, positioning herself between the nervous bay filly and the source of the frightening sounds. Each new development confirmed what they had all begun to suspect. Aurora was not merely unusual in appearance. She possessed an intelligence that bordered on the impossible. Dr. Hannigan visited regularly, documenting Aurora's development with professional thoroughness, though even her scientific objectivity was tested by the white filly's capabilities. During her fourth visit, she brought news that both confirmed their suspicions and deepened the mystery. "The blood work results are, well, unprecedented," she explained as they sat at Maggie's kitchen table, files spread out before them. "Aurora's genetic profile shows anomalies I've never seen before. My colleague at the university was equally baffled." Maggie frowned, cradling a mug of coffee between her hands. "What kind of anomalies? Is she sick?" Dr. Hannigan shook her head quickly. "No, nothing like that. She's perfectly healthy. Remarkably so, in fact. Her immune function is off the charts. But there are sequences in her DNA that—" She hesitated, as if reluctant to continue. "That what?" Emma pressed, leaning forward. The veterinarian sighed. "That don't match any known equine genetics. Some of these sequences aren't even in our database. It's as if—" She paused again, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to suggest. "It's as if she's not entirely normal." "We already knew she wasn't normal," Maggie said dryly. "The question is what she is." Dr. Hannigan closed the folder in front of her. "I wish I could tell you." My colleague wants to run more tests, maybe even bring in specialists from larger research institutions. But Maggie, I have to warn you, this is the kind of discovery that could attract significant attention. Once word gets out about Aurora. If word gets out, Maggie corrected firmly. But even as she spoke, she knew it was already too late. In a small community like Willowbrook, secrets rarely remained secret for long. The first sign came that very afternoon when Maggie answered a knock at the door to find Diane Mercer, who owned the feed store in town, standing on her porch with a casserole dish. "Thought you could use a hot meal. What with all the cleanup you must be doing," Diane said, her eyes darting past Maggie toward the barn. "And well, I heard you had some excitement during the flood. Twins, was it? Someone said one of them is white as snow with the strangest markings." Maggie accepted the casserole with a tight smile. "News travels fast." "Small town," Diane replied with a shrug that didn't quite mask her curiosity. "So is it true? About the white foal?" By the end of the week, Maggie had fielded similar inquiries from a dozen neighbors, 2 local reporters, and even the president of the Regional Equestrian Society. All had heard rumors about the miraculous white foal born during the flood, though the details varied wildly with each telling. Some said she was pure white with blue eyes, others claimed she had golden hooves, and one particularly creative version described her as having a horn just beginning to emerge from her forehead. "It's getting out of hand," Maggie told Emma and Jackson as they gathered for dinner one evening. "I've had 3 calls today from people asking if they can come see her. One man offered to buy her sight unseen, offered a ridiculous sum of money." Emma's face paled. "You're not considering selling her?" "Of course not," Maggie replied firmly. "But we need to think about how to handle this. Dr. Hannigan was right. Aurora is going to attract attention whether we want it or not." Jackson, who had been quiet throughout the conversation, spoke up. "Maybe we should let a few people see her, on our terms. Control the narrative, you know. Better than having people show up uninvited or spreading wild rumors." Maggie considered this, then nodded slowly. "You might be right. We could invite Dr. Hannigan and her colleague, maybe a couple of respected breeders, people who'll approach this professionally." "What about the press?" Emma asked. "Not yet," Maggie decided. "Let's start small, with people who understand horses and won't sensationalize this." That night after dinner, Emma slipped out to the barn for what had become her nightly ritual, spending time alone with Aurora. In the 3 weeks since the birth, a profound bond had formed between the girl and the unusual filly. Emma found herself confiding in Aurora as she might in a close friend, sharing thoughts and feelings she'd never expressed aloud before. And always, Aurora listened with that unnerving intelligence, those golden-ringed eyes fixed on Emma with an intensity that suggested complete comprehension. "People are starting to find out about you," Emma said softly, sitting on a bale of hay as Aurora stood nearby. "They're going to want to see you, study you. Some might even want to take you away." Her voice broke slightly on these last words, the thought of separation already painful. Aurora stepped closer, lowering her head to gently nudge Emma's shoulder in what felt unmistakably like reassurance. "I won't let them take you," Emma whispered, wrapping her arms around the filly's neck. "I promise." As she held Aurora close, Emma was unaware of the car that had pulled up to the farm's entrance or of the man who now stood in the shadows, watching the barn with calculating eyes. The attention they had feared was already arriving, and not all of it with honorable intentions. The day of the first official visit dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the stormy night that had brought Aurora into the world. Maggie had carefully selected their guests. Dr. Hannigan, of course, her colleague Dr. Marcus Chen from the university's Veterinary Genetics Department, and Catherine Wilkes, a respected Andalusian breeder whose integrity Maggie trusted implicitly. A small, controlled group that Maggie hoped would approach Aurora's uniqueness with scientific curiosity rather than exploitation. As they waited for the visitors to arrive, Emma sat in the barn with Aurora and Storm. The bay filly had grown considerably in the past 3 weeks, her frame filling out with healthy muscle. She had her mother's athletic build and seemed destined to be a fine horse, though she remained firmly in her sister's shadow in terms of remarkable qualities. "People are coming to see you today," Emma told Aurora, her fingers gently combing through the filly's silky white mane. "Important people, scientists. They're going to want to understand what makes you special." Aurora's ears flicked forward at Emma's words, that now familiar look of comprehension in her golden-ringed eyes. Over the past weeks, Emma had become convinced that Aurora understood not just the cadence of human speech, but the actual meaning of words. It was more than the usual equine response to tone and routine. Aurora seemed to process language itself. "Just be yourself," Emma continued, smiling as Aurora nudged her shoulder. "Even if that means being extraordinary." The sound of car doors closing announced the arrival of their guests. Emma gave Aurora a final pat and went to join her mother in welcoming the visitors. Dr. Hannigan made the introductions as they gathered in the farmhouse kitchen for coffee before heading to the barn. Dr. Chen was a slight man with quick, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He spoke with the precise diction of someone who had learned English as a second language but mastered it thoroughly. "Dr. Hannigan has shared some of her observations and preliminary findings," he said, addressing Maggie. "I must admit, I was skeptical until I saw the genetic profiles myself." Catherine Wilkes, a tall woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, nodded in agreement. "I've bred Andalusians for over 40 years, and I've never heard of a true white with markings like you've described. I'm quite eager to see this filly for myself." After coffee, Maggie led the group to the barn. Emma had prepared everything, making sure the stall was spotless, and both Luna and the twins were groomed to perfection. As they approached, Emma felt a flutter of nervousness. What if Aurora chose this moment to act like an ordinary foal? Or conversely, what if she did something so extraordinary that these visitors insisted on removing her for study? But when they entered the barn, Emma's worries shifted to an entirely different concern. Standing by the stall, camera in hand, was a man none of them had invited, the same man who had been watching from the shadows the night before. Medium height with a weathered face and the practiced casual stance of a journalist, he turned at their entrance with an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, extending a hand toward Maggie. "Richard Blackwood, Equestrian Today magazine. Hope you don't mind my dropping by. Word about your unusual foal has reached quite far, and our readers would be fascinated by this story." Maggie's expression hardened. "I mind very much, Mr. Blackwood. This is a private visit, by invitation only. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Blackwood's smile didn't falter. "Of course I understand, but perhaps we could schedule an official interview. Exclusive rights, professional photography. We'd make it worth your while." He reached into his pocket and produced a business card, which Maggie reluctantly accepted. "I'll consider it," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Jackson will show you out." Jackson, who had been mucking stalls nearby, stepped forward with a firm expression that brooked no argument. After a moment's hesitation, Blackwood allowed himself to be escorted from the barn, though not before casting one last, lingering look at the stall where Luna and her foals were kept. "How did he get in here?" Dr. Hannigan asked once Blackwood was gone. Maggie sighed. "The property's still a mess from the flood. Fences down in several places. We haven't had time to repair everything." She shook off her concern and managed a smile. "But let's not let him spoil this. You're here to see Aurora, and she's right here." As they approached the stall, the three visitors fell silent, their professional composure momentarily forgotten as they beheld Aurora for the first time. The white filly stood beside her mother, her coat gleaming like fresh snow in the barn's dim light. The golden rings around her eyes seemed to capture and reflect the sunlight streaming through the windows, creating an almost hypnotic effect. "Extraordinary," Catherine Wilkes breathed, her expert eye taking in every detail of Aurora's conformation. Absolutely perfect structure. And that color, true white, not gray, not cremello. In an Andalusian, it's unheard of. Dr. Chen had already pulled out a tablet and was taking notes rapidly, his expression a mixture of scientific fascination and disbelief. The golden markings, they follow a perfect circular pattern, almost like ocelli. "Ocelli?" Emma asked. "Eye spots," Dr. Chen explained, "like those found on butterfly wings or certain deep-sea creatures. They serve various purposes in nature, attracting mates, deterring predators, or in some theories, channeling energy." He adjusted his glasses. Though, of course, nothing like this has ever been documented in equines. As they continued their observations, Aurora remained calm, allowing Dr. Hannigan to approach for a more thorough examination. But when Dr. Chen stepped forward with his tablet, raising it as if to take photographs, Aurora reacted in a way that left them all stunned. The white filly moved to position herself directly between Storm and the visitors, her stance protective. Then, looking directly at Dr. Chen, she pawed the ground 3 times in a deliberate pattern before turning her head to look pointedly at the tablet in his hands. The message was unmistakable. No pictures. Dr. Chen slowly lowered his tablet, his hands trembling slightly. Did she just communicate? Emma finished for him, a hint of pride in her voice. Yes, she does that. For the next hour, the visitors conducted their examination with Aurora's apparent cooperation. Blood samples were taken, measurements recorded, and observations noted. Throughout it all, Aurora demonstrated behaviors that defied conventional understanding of equine capabilities, responding to complex verbal instructions, demonstrating problem-solving abilities, and showing what could only be described as consideration for the comfort of those around her. As the visit concluded, all 3 specialists were visibly affected by what they had witnessed. Their scientific training warred with the evidence of their own eyes, evidence that suggested Aurora was something beyond their current understanding. "We'll need to run these new samples," Dr. Hannigan said, her voice hushed as they prepared to leave. "Compare them with what we have so far. But Maggie, I have to tell you, what we're seeing here, it challenges everything we know about equine cognition and development." Catherine Wilkes, who had been silent for some time, finally spoke. "Whatever she is, and I'm not sure I have words for it, you must protect her. There are those who would exploit such a creature, for profit or prestige." As if to underscore the warning, they spotted Blackwood's car still parked at the end of the driveway, the journalist himself nowhere to be seen. The message was clear. Their privacy had been breached, and the wider world was already closing in on Aurora's secret. The specialist's visit marked a turning point. Within days, despite promises of confidentiality, rumors about Aurora spread beyond Willowbrook to equestrian circles throughout the region. What had begun as local curiosity transformed into something more intense, a growing fascination that brought a steady stream of uninvited visitors to the Reynolds farm. Some came openly, knocking on the farmhouse door with transparent excuses about buying hay or inquiring about boarding services, their curious gazes always drifting toward the barn. Others were more furtive, attempting to sneak onto the property after dark, only to be turned away by Jackson, who had taken to patrolling the perimeter each night. "This is getting out of hand," Maggie said one evening, peering through the curtains at yet another slow-moving car passing by the driveway. 3 more people tried to get in today, and look at this." She tossed a small stack of business cards onto the kitchen table where Emma sat helping Storm with geometry homework. Breeding offers, documentary proposals, even a circus scout. Can you believe that? Emma picked up one of the cards, its glossy surface emblazoned with the logo of a major equestrian performance company. They all want her because she's different, because they think they can profit from her somehow. That's exactly it, Maggie agreed, sinking into a chair. To them, she's not a living being with her own personhood, as strange as that sounds. She's a commodity, an attraction. The pressure intensified when Equestrian Today magazine published its first article about Aurora, complete with grainy, distance-shot photographs that Blackwood must have taken during his uninvited visit. The piece was sensationalized, describing Aurora as a miracle foal with otherworldly intelligence and possibly supernatural origins. Though the article included qualifying statements about awaiting scientific verification, the damage was done. The story was picked up by larger publications, and soon Aurora became the subject of wild speculation across various media platforms. Alien horse DNA theory gains traction, Emma read aloud from her phone, scrolling through one of the more outlandish online articles. Scientists baffled by foal that may represent next step in equine evolution. Listen to this. Sources close to the investigation suggest that the foal, known as Aurora, displays cognitive abilities approaching human-level intelligence. She looked up at her mother. It's crazy. They're making her sound like some kind of science fiction experiment. Maggie sighed. I knew it would be bad, but I didn't expect this level of circus. Dr. Hannigan called this morning. She's being hounded for information, and apparently Dr. Chen's university department is now under pressure to publish their findings prematurely. The situation reached a critical point on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 month after Aurora's birth. Emma was in the barn, grooming Storm while Luna and Aurora grazed in the attached paddock, when she heard the sound of multiple vehicles approaching. Setting down the brush, she moved to the barn door and felt her heart sink at the sight that greeted her. 3 black SUVs had pulled up in front of the farmhouse. Men in dark suits emerged from the first 2 vehicles, while the third produced a familiar figure, Richard Blackwood, looking considerably more polished than during his previous visit, accompanied by an older man in an expensive-looking overcoat. Emma immediately texted her mother, who was in town buying supplies, then called out to Jackson, who was repairing fence posts nearby. By the time the visitors reached the barn, Emma and Jackson stood side by side, a united front between the strangers and the paddock where Aurora grazed. Ms. Reynolds, Blackwood greeted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, or rather the younger Ms. Reynolds. Is your mother available? She's not here, Emma replied coolly, and this is private property. You're trespassing. The older man stepped forward, extending a business card which Emma reluctantly accepted. Lawrence Winters, Continental Equestrian Enterprises. I apologize for the unannounced visit, but we've been trying to reach your mother through proper channels without success. Emma recognized the name immediately. Continental was one of the largest equestrian conglomerates in the country, owning everything from breeding facilities to competition venues to a popular line of equestrian gear. What do you want? Jackson asked, his stance protective as he moved slightly closer to Emma. Winters smiled, a practiced expression that conveyed confidence rather than warmth. We're here to make an offer, an extremely generous offer, for the unusual foal your family has been keeping. Continental is prepared to provide state-of-the-art facilities, the best care available, and of course, substantial financial compensation. Aurora isn't for sale, Emma stated flatly. Everything has a price, my dear, Winters replied, his tone condescending. Perhaps we should discuss numbers with your mother. I assure you we're prepared to be quite generous. You don't understand, Emma said, frustration coloring her voice. She's not just some rare specimen you can add to your collection. She's—" A soft nickering interrupted her. Emma turned to see Aurora standing at the paddock fence, her golden-ringed eyes fixed intently on the visitors. There was something in her gaze, a wariness, an assessment, that sent a chill down Emma's spine. It was as if the filly was reading these men, understanding their intentions in a way that went beyond animal instinct. One of the suited men noticed her attention and nudged Winters, who turned to look at Aurora. For a long moment, man and foal locked eyes in what felt like a silent confrontation. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Aurora deliberately turned her back on the visitors and walked to the far end of the paddock, her message unmistakable. Winter's expression darkened momentarily before he composed himself. Spirited, I like that in a horse. He turned back to Emma. My offer stands. Please have your mother call me when she returns. I believe she'll find our proposal compelling. As the men returned to their vehicles, Emma noticed Blackwood lingering behind, his gaze still fixed on Aurora. You know, he said quietly, there are other ways to acquire special animals. Legal ways mostly, but not always. Some collectors aren't as patient or as ethical as Mr. Winters. You might want to keep that in mind. The implied threat hung in the air as he walked away, leaving Emma and Jackson exchanging worried glances. By the time Maggie returned, Emma had already moved Luna and both foals to the most secure stall in the barn. As they discussed the visit, the gravity of their situation became increasingly clear. Aurora's fame had spread too far, too fast. It was no longer just curious neighbors or enthusiastic horse lovers they needed to worry about, but powerful interests with the resources to potentially take Aurora by legal means or otherwise. We need to leave, Emma said suddenly, the realization crystallizing in her mind. We need to take Aurora somewhere safe, somewhere they won't find her. Maggie looked at her daughter in surprise. Leave? Emma, this is our home. The farm has been in our family for generations. I know, Emma said, her voice breaking slightly. But Aurora isn't safe here anymore. You heard what Blackwood said. Implied anyway. There are people who might try to take her, people who don't care about her welfare, only what she's worth, or what they can learn from her. As if understanding the gravity of the conversation, Aurora approached the stall door, her intelligent eyes moving between mother and daughter. The filly had grown noticeably in the month since her birth, her frame developing with the same accelerated pace as her cognitive abilities. She was still unmistakably a foal, but there was a presence about her, a sense of awareness that made her seem much older than her 4 weeks of life. Maggie reached out to stroke Aurora's neck, her expression troubled. Where would we even go? The decision to leave wasn't made lightly. For 3 generations, the Reynolds family had worked this land, weathered storms both literal and figurative, built a life that was woven into the very soil of the place. But as night fell and they gathered around the kitchen table, Maggie, Emma, and Jackson, the path forward became increasingly clear. Catherine Wilkes called today, Maggie said, turning her coffee mug in slow circles. She heard about Winter's visit. News travels fast in equestrian circles. She's offered us sanctuary at her breeding facility in the mountains. It's remote, private, with security systems and staff she trusts implicitly. Emma nodded slowly. Do you think we can trust her? I do, Maggie replied after a moment's consideration. Catherine has been in this business for decades without a hint of scandal. She values the horses above all else, their welfare, their dignity, and she seemed genuinely moved by Aurora, not just impressed, but respectful. Jackson, who had been quiet throughout much of the discussion, finally spoke. If we're doing this, we need to move fast and quiet. Those men who came today, they've got resources, connections. Once they realize you're serious about not selling, they might escalate. Tonight, Emma said decisively. We should leave tonight. The urgency in her voice startled both Maggie and Jackson, but Emma's intuition about Aurora had proven reliable thus far. If she felt immediate action was necessary, they were inclined to trust her judgment. The plan came together quickly. They would travel by night, taking only Luna, the twins, and essential supplies. Jackson would drive the truck and trailer, taking a circuitous route to Catherine's facility in the Blue Ridge Mountains about 6 hours away. Maggie would follow separately in her car, creating a diversion if necessary. The property wouldn't be left completely abandoned. Their neighbor, Mr. Grayson, would check in daily to care for the remaining animals and keep an eye on things. As they prepared for departure, Emma spent time with Aurora, sensing the filly's awareness of the impending journey. "We're taking you somewhere safe," she explained in low tones, securing a light blanket around the foal for warmth during the night journey. "People who want to protect you, not exploit you." Aurora's response was as extraordinary as it was unexpected. The white filly moved to the stall door and pawed 3 times, the same deliberate pattern she had used to communicate with Dr. Chen. Then, with careful precision, she used her muzzle to push Emma's backpack toward her, the message unmistakable. She understood they were leaving and wanted Emma to be prepared. Loading the horses into the trailer proceeded with remarkable ease. Luna, who normally required some coaxing to enter a trailer, walked in calmly, followed by Storm. Aurora entered last, her golden-ringed eyes seeming to glow faintly in the darkness as she took one final look at the barn that had been her first home. "It's like she knows exactly what's happening," Jackson murmured as he secured the trailer door. By midnight, they were ready. The property was dark save for a single light left on in the kitchen, a normal pattern that wouldn't arouse suspicion. Their phones were turned off to prevent tracking, and they had agreed to communicate only through prepaid phones purchased earlier that day. Everything of importance to Aurora, her medical records, Dr. Hannigan's preliminary findings, their own observations, had been packed into a waterproof case that Emma kept close at all times. "Ready?" Maggie asked, embracing her daughter before they separated to their respective vehicles. Emma nodded, though her heart ached at the thought of leaving the only home she had ever known. "Ready." The caravan pulled out silently, headlights dimmed until they reached the main road. Jackson took the lead, driving the truck and trailer at a steady pace, careful not to attract attention. Maggie followed at a distance, her car's familiar silhouette hopefully unremarkable to any watching eyes. For the first hour, the journey proceeded without incident. They avoided the interstate, sticking to lesser-used country roads that wound through farmland and forest. The night was clear, stars speckling the sky above like distant sentinels watching over their escape. It was nearing the 2-hour mark when Emma, riding with Jackson, noticed headlights appear behind them. Headlights that seemed to match their every turn, maintaining a constant distance. "I think we're being followed," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady despite the surge of fear. Jackson checked the rearview mirror. "Black SUV?" Emma nodded, her throat tight. "Could be coincidence," Jackson said, though his knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "But let's not take chances." He reached for the prepaid phone and punched in Maggie's number. "We've got company. Time for that diversion we discussed." In the car behind them, Maggie received the message with grim determination. At the next junction, instead of continuing to follow Jackson and the precious cargo he carried, she took a different turn, accelerating slightly, just enough to make it clear she was aware of being followed and was attempting to evade. The black SUV hesitated at the junction, then peeled off after Maggie's car. "They took the bait," Emma breathed, watching the headlights recede in pursuit of her mother. "But will Mom be okay?" "Your mother is smarter and tougher than most people realize," Jackson assured her, taking yet another turn to further distance themselves from potential pursuit. "She knows what she's doing." Indeed, Maggie had prepared for this possibility. Her route would take her through Willowbrook and past the sheriff's office, where her old friend Sheriff Tanner would be waiting, briefed earlier that day about potential harassment from overzealous journalists or corporate representatives. The SUV would find itself pulled over for a lengthy check of registration and driver identification, giving Maggie ample time to circle back and rejoin Jackson on an alternate route. As they continued through the night, Emma found herself drawn to the trailer, checking on the horses through the small observation window. Luna and Storm were calm, lulled by the rhythm of the road into a light doze. Aurora, however, remained alert, her white coat almost luminous in the darkness. When Emma peered in, the filly immediately turned toward her, those golden-ringed eyes seeming to convey both understanding and reassurance. "She's not afraid at all," Emma murmured to Jackson. "It's like she knows we're doing this to protect her." "Maybe she does," Jackson replied simply. By dawn, they had covered significant ground, the familiar landscapes of home giving way to the rising terrain of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Maggie had rejoined them hours earlier, her diversion successful in throwing off their pursuers. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the world seemed to expand around them, vast forests spreading in every direction, mist clinging to distant peaks, the air growing cooler and cleaner with each mile. Catherine's breeding facility was nestled in a secluded valley, accessible only by a private road that wound through thick forest. As they approached the final stretch, a sense of cautious relief began to settle over the weary travelers. The high stone walls and security gate of the facility represented safety, a temporary haven where they could catch their breath and plan their next steps. Catherine herself was waiting at the gate, her tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun. As they pulled to a stop, she approached with a warm but serious expression. "You made it," she said, her eyes quickly taking in their exhausted state. "Any problems along the way?" "A tail, but we lost them," Maggie replied, stepping out of her car with stiff movements. "Thank you for this, Catherine. I don't know what we would have done otherwise." Catherine waved away the thanks. "Some things transcend business or even friendship, Maggie. What's happening with Aurora? It's something greater than all of us. I recognized that the moment I saw her." She turned toward the trailer, where Aurora was now visible through the window, those remarkable eyes fixed on the new surroundings. "And I think somehow she knows it too." Catherine's mountain facility proved to be everything she had promised and more. Nestled in a protected valley with natural stone walls rising on three sides, the property offered security that would have been impossible to achieve at the Reynolds farm. State-of-the-art stables housed some of the finest Andalusians in the country, while expansive pastures provided ample space for exercise and grazing. Most importantly, the remote location and Catherine's trusted staff ensured a level of privacy that allowed them all to breathe easier. The first week passed in relative peace. Luna and her foals were given a spacious stall in the main barn, with access to a private paddock that remained shielded from outside view. Dr. Hannigan visited twice, bringing updated test results that only deepened the mystery of Aurora's genetics. "We've run every analysis possible," she explained as they gathered in Catherine's wood-paneled office. "And the conclusion remains the same. Aurora's DNA contains sequences that simply don't match any known equine genetics. Even more remarkably, these sequences appear to be actively expressing themselves as she develops." "Expressing themselves how?" Maggie asked, leaning forward in her chair. Dr. Hannigan spread several charts on the desk. "Her cellular regeneration rates are off the charts. Her neural development is proceeding at a pace that defies all established models. And there's something else, something we only discovered yesterday." She paused, as if gathering courage for what she was about to share. "Her cells appear to be generating an extremely subtle electromagnetic field. It's unlike anything we've ever recorded in an equine subject." Emma, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly spoke up. "That's how she communicates, isn't it? That's how she understands us so completely." The veterinarian gave her a long look. "That would be an extraordinary leap, scientifically speaking. But given everything else we've observed, I can't rule it out." As the adults continued their discussion, Emma slipped away to the barn. She found Aurora standing at the paddock fence, seemingly waiting for her. Over the past weeks, their connection had deepened into something Emma couldn't quite explain, a bond that transcended the normal relationship between human and animal. At times, she felt that Aurora could see into her very thoughts, responding not just to her words but to her unspoken feelings. "They're still trying to understand what you are," Emma said softly, stroking the filly's gleaming neck. "But I'm not sure they ever will. Not completely." Aurora nickered softly, pressing her muzzle against Emma's palm. In that touch, Emma felt a current of warmth that seemed to flow between them, carrying with it a sense of reassurance that went beyond words. Their peaceful interlude at Catherine's facility lasted exactly 2 weeks before reality intruded once more. The call came from Mr. Grayson, their neighbor who had been watching the Reynolds farm in their absence. "They're here," he reported, his voice tense over the speakerphone in Catherine's office. "Winters and his people, they've got some kind of court order, claim they're conducting an investigation into potentially harmful genetic experimentation on livestock. They're searching the property now." Maggie's face paled. "An investigation? That's absurd. We haven't done anything wrong." "It's a pretext," Catherine said grimly. "A legal maneuver to gain access and look for Aurora. Once they realize you've relocated, they'll start tracking your movements." Her prediction proved accurate. Within days, reports came in from Catherine's contacts in the equestrian world. Questions were being asked, substantial rewards offered for information on the whereabouts of the miracle foal. Winter's company had mobilized significant resources, and they weren't the only ones searching. Other interests had joined the hunt: research institutions, private collectors, even a shadowy group that specialized in acquiring exotic animals for wealthy clients. "We can't keep running forever," Maggie said one evening, the weight of their situation evident in the lines of exhaustion on her face. "This farm, as secure as it is, won't remain a secret indefinitely, and we can't impose on Catherine's generosity forever." Emma, who had been staring out the window at the paddock where Aurora now grazed in the moonlight, turned with sudden resolution. "I need to show you something." She led her mother and Catherine out to the paddock, where Aurora greeted them with her usual preternatural awareness. Storm and Luna were dozing in the stable, but Aurora, as always, seemed fully alert regardless of the hour. "Watch," Emma said simply. She approached Aurora and placed her hand on the filly's forehead, right between those remarkable golden-ringed eyes. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, gradually, a soft light began to emanate from beneath Emma's palm. Not a harsh glow, but a gentle radiance that illuminated their faces in the darkness. Maggie gasped, instinctively stepping back. "Emma, what?" "She's been trying to show me for days," Emma explained, her voice steady despite the extraordinary nature of what was happening. I think she's ready to reveal who she really is." As they watched in awe, the glow intensified, spreading from Aurora's forehead to encompass her entire body. The white coat that had seemed so remarkable now appeared almost translucent, revealing an intricate network of golden energy beneath, like veins of light coursing through her form. "My God," Catherine whispered, her usual composure completely abandoned. "What is she?" The answer came not in words, but in a series of images that flooded their minds simultaneously. Stars wheeling in distant galaxies, ancient forests untouched by human hands, creatures of light moving through dimensions beyond normal perception, and through it all a sense of purpose, of protection, of balance. When the light finally faded and Aurora stood before them once more as a seemingly ordinary white foal, they all remained silent for several long moments, trying to process what they had experienced. "She's a guardian," Emma said finally, the certainty in her voice leaving no room for doubt. "A sentinel, I think, is the word she wants me to use. Sent to watch, to understand, to help." "Sent by whom?" Maggie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma shook her head slowly. "I don't think we have words for them, but they've been watching Earth for a very long time, and they're concerned about the balance between humans and the natural world." "And Aurora is their emissary?" Catherine asked, struggling to frame the incomprehensible in familiar terms. "One of many, I think," Emma replied. "But the others aren't like her. They observe from a distance. Aurora is different. She chose to be born here, to live among us, to experience the world as a part of it rather than apart from it." In the days that followed, their understanding of Aurora and their purpose in protecting her underwent a profound transformation. This was no longer about safeguarding a valuable or unique animal from exploitation. It was about honoring the presence of something far greater, something that had chosen them as its caretakers. The threats from the outside world didn't disappear, but they seemed less significant now, less capable of touching the profound reality that Aurora represented. Winters and his corporate interests, Blackwood with his sensationalist journalism, even the scientific community with its probing questions, all were operating from a fundamentally limited understanding of what Aurora truly was. On a clear spring morning, nearly a year after Aurora's birth, Maggie stood with Emma at the fence of the mountain pasture, where Luna and her now-grown foals grazed peacefully. Storm had developed into a magnificent bay mare, every inch her mother's daughter. Aurora, still pure white with her golden eye markings, remained smaller, but carried herself with an otherworldly grace that no other horse could match. "Do you think she'll stay with us?" Maggie asked, watching as Aurora lifted her head to gaze at the distant mountains, as if seeing beyond them to realms they couldn't perceive. Emma smiled, a sense of peace in her expression that hadn't been there before. "For as long as she needs to. For as long as we have something to teach her, and she has something to teach us." As if hearing her words, Aurora turned toward them, those remarkable eyes reflecting the morning light. In that gaze was a promise, not of forever, but of now, of presence, of shared purpose in a world that needed healing more than it knew. And for now, that was enough.